La amenaza de guerra es cada vez mayor.
Today we are living through the most dangerous moment of the post-Cold War period. Now people feel much better that we are in danger.
Europa, los europeos, no estamos preparados para afrontar el mundo como es. Es un mundo duro, agresivo, lleno de desafíos y que tenemos que estar preparados para adaptarnos a las circunstancias más difíciles de las que estamos acostumbrados. Porque hemos construido la paz entre nosotros, y es una cosa extraordinaria, excepcional, única en nuestra historia, y hemos creído que esa paz era la forma normal en la que las cosas ocurrían, no solamente en Europa, sino en el mundo. Y no sabemos la suerte que tenemos.
Now, to conclude our debate, I give the floor to Vice President and High Representative Josep Borrell.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to all the members that has participated in this debate.
The Spaniard, Josep Borrell, is today the High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Defence and Vice President of the European Union, a club of 27 countries that share parts of their sovereignty, but where each has its own geopolitical interests. Their job is to try to find a single voice.
Cuando propuse el nombre de Borrell en la negociación, después de muchos días de discrepancia en quienes debían ocupar los puestos de responsabilidad, la verdad es que entró de manera muy natural. Primero porque había sido presidente del Parlamento Europeo, porque tenía un prestigio como europeísta reconocido, pues fue aceptado de manera inmediata, ¿no?
Josep Borrell, an aeronautical engineer and economist, has spent a lifetime in public service, first as a minister in several socialist governments in Spain, and then as an MEP, President of the European Parliament, and now as head of European diplomacy. To help him, the Treaty of Lisbon established the creation in 2009 of the European External Action Service, a huge organisation that manages delegations and military and civilian missions around the world. Before Borrell, it was chaired by Catherine Ashton of England and Federica Mogherini of Italy. Diplomat Stefano Sannino is its current director.
Dirigo questa complessa struttura che è fatta di 145 delegazioni sparse nel mondo, più un corpo centrale qui a Bruxelles e che impiega più di 5.000 persone che cercano di lavorare per la pace nel mondo.
The European Union is facing a complex geopolitical scenario, a new world order where all participants are struggling to strengthen their position in a time of high risk for democracy. This is the chronicle of 3 months at the heart of European diplomacy. 3 months during Spain's rotating presidency in which Europe faces some of its greatest existential challenges, starting with the war in Ukraine.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
Russian military forces launched an operation in neighboring Ukraine on Thursday. Civilian and military casualties have been reported.
Satellite surveillance is key to the European Union. The European Union Satellite Centre in Torrejón de Ardoz manages a network of more than 20 satellites. They deliver information to their members or allies such as the Ukrainian army.
Monitorizamos qué actividades están llevando las fuerzas de seguridad. Si hay patrolling, si se despliega algún tipo de fuerza militar, qué está pasando del otro lado, qué pueden esperar.
Son casi 1000 informes al año sobre Ceuta, Melilla, la ruta del Mediterráneo Central, Canarias, los Balcanes, la frontera este.
¿Estos ven así?
Sí. El que haya 2 imágenes, cada una con un color, genera esa visión tridimensional.
¡Ostras!
Es un edificio
¡Dios mío!
Se ve, de hecho,
Del techo hasta el fondo.
Pero esto es increíble, ¿no?
La primera vez que lo ves asusta.
Pero así, es que parece que...
Sale.
Wow, pero es que es una cosa...
Josep became like a real fighter, a real hawk, in diplomatic terms. Because on the one hand, he has to lead a family of EU nations, but he decided to truly lead it, not just to coordinate, but to lead. And that made a lot of difference. And it really made many decisions possible. Without him, we wouldn't have gotten so far. This relationship between colleagues turned into a brotherhood in diplomatic arms. That's how I would call it.
Por supuesto que quiero la paz, por supuesto. Pero en el caso de Ucrania no me sirve cualquier paz. No me sirve cualquier paz. Porque yo sé muy bien cómo se acaba la guerra en Ucrania. Dejamos de ayudar a Ucrania y la guerra se acaba en 15 días. Pero ¿cómo se acaba? O sea, ¿cómo se acaba?
Ucrania, el Servicio de Inteligencia Exterior, nos manda sus peticiones el lunes por la mañana. Y nos dice, esta semana, estas son las coordenadas que yo quiero cubrir. Algunas de ellas en menos de 24 horas, porque son urgentes, porque se están jugando el pellejo. Necesitan una respuesta sí o sí.
Borrell travels to Ukraine. This is his third visit to the country since the large-scale Russian invasion of 2022. First, the High Representative heads to the strategic city of Odessa, Ukraine's main port and a key Ukrainian target. If Odessa falls, the country's access to the sea would be cut off.
Rusia, sobre todo a lo largo del último año, viene llevando a cabo ataques aéreos de noches que combinan drones, hemos visto drones iraníes, con lo cual en una ciudad como Odessa pues alterna la normalidad de lo que era Ucrania antes de la nueva invasión rusa y a la vez que esa normalidad puede ser destruida en un momento en el que fallen las defensas aéreas porque Rusia ataca con drones casi todo el tiempo y con misiles también.
You see people here, but whenever they are at this place, they are still nervous because the attack can happen anytime.
The picture of the house?
Можно? Yes, but in front.
Тут можно все.
Да.
It's not a military objective.
Any public space can be Russia's next military target. The locals know the rules well. Make the most of daylight before the night curfew. These bombardments often come from the neighbouring Crimean Peninsula, occupied by the Russians in 2014. They seek to undermine the morale of the inhabitants, destroying the most symbolic places, such as the city's historic Orthodox cathedral.
7 missile strikes at that night. Russian propaganda was saying that these are the debris from the Russian anti-air missile. But you can see the destruction that has been caused. Debris cannot cause this sort of destruction.
Russian attacks are aimed at stifling the national economy by preventing grain from leaving the Black Sea.
Atacan los puertos ucranianos en el Danubio y hay que entender que Rusia intenta destruir todos los medios de supervivencia que tiene Ucrania, que es una economía de exportación y que necesita exportar. Pero gracias a la audacia militar ucraniana, que también se beneficia del apoyo occidental, Ucrania está pudiendo exportar grano a niveles casi anteriores al comienzo de la invasión.
Hemos pasado por Odessa, porque en Odessa tenemos desplegada una misión de apoyo a las fuerzas de seguridad de Ucrania, no militares, sino de la policía. Se fueron con la invasión, han vuelto ahora, se han instalado en Odessa
y también para conocer cómo vive la sociedad ucraniana, la situación en la que está.
В последнее время мы фиксируем очень много случаев сексуализированного насилия у наших военнопленных, освобожденных мужчин. И тут мы говорим о пытках, связанных с сексуализацией, в том числе 250 случаев сексуального насилия, из которых мужчины 85, женщины 150, несовершеннолетние 13, из которых 12 девочек и 1 мальчик.
Потому что мы понимаем, что мы все, абсолютно все, находимся в состоянии посттравматического синдрома.
And it's also sending a strong signal to Russia. Just after I left Odessa, a new rain of drones falling in the oblast of Odessa. We are not intimidated by your drones or missiles. Our resolve to support the fight of freedom and independence of Ukraine is firm and will continue.
Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo ha anat el dia?
Sempre.
Un dia molt llarg, no?
Com sempre, saps? Bueno, tenim que vigilar què és el que passa a Sèrbia, Kosovo, com està Armènia, Azerbaiyán, a veure què us diu. Tenim la reunió de Granada la setmana que ve, mirant el paper.
Sempre quan arribes aquí, la percepció canvia i també és emocionant com quan hem anat a l'òpera, com segueix la vida i si no poden fer òpera per la nit perquè faran bombardejos, fan pel dia, no?
A pocs quilòmetres, centenars de quilòmetres i a la línia de front, no? La vida continúa.
La vida continúa.
Ucrania está amenazada existencialmente y de alguna manera le rinden tributo a los caídos. Hay que entender que respetan a las Fuerzas Armadas y a figuras de las Fuerzas Armadas que a menudo son voluntarios, directores, electricistas, fontaneros, etc. Y para ellos pues como héroes. En la Plaza de la Independencia ponen una banderita en señal de respeto y en señal de aprecio a los muertos en la guerra. Mayormente son voluntarios que murieron ayudando a Ucrania, murieron luchando por Ucrania. Y desgraciadamente, pues el número de banderitas ha crecido a lo largo de los últimos año y medio.
It doesn't make sense to have any discussions about relations with Russia, because today Russia is the biggest threat to Europe. It's not a partner, a problematic partner that you have to build your relations with. It's an enemy, it's a threat, and you have to treat it accordingly.
Слава Україні!
Te encuentras en varias ciudades ucranianas restos de tanques y carros rusos. El ejército ruso había hecho preparativos para desfiles militares en Kiev y bueno, la broma que tienen los ucranianos es que los únicos desfiles por ahora, menos mal, gracias a Dios, son de los tanques rusos destruidos.
Putin jubiló. Putin capullo. Es popular el dicho aquí.
The first major diplomatic crisis Borrell had to face when he took office was the controversy generated by his request for a visit with the anti-regime dissident, Alexei Navalny, who was imprisoned in Russia. The European media accused him of meddling in Russian internal affairs. He was heavily criticized, and not only by his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov.
Certainly our relations are on the severe strain, and the Navalny case is a low point in our relation.
Since then, the High Representative has become a scapegoat for Russian propaganda.
Боррель – враг русского народа. Я хочу, чтобы у него на гробу было вот так вот написано: здесь покоится враг славян, враг русского народа, враг человечества. Сатанинское отродье, мелкий бес.
Siempre había las voces de, bueno, no nos metamos, en este caso no nos afecta. Sí, me meto en su casa. ¿Por qué? Pues porque hay unas leyes internacionales de respeto a los derechos humanos, porque hay convenios que usted ha firmado y yo también, y había que ir allí justo en el momento en que Navalny estaba sentado delante del tribunal, a poner sobre la mesa nuestro rechazo a la manera como el poder político ruso se está comportando con este hombre que unos años después ha muerto en Siberia en un campo de concentración, una penitenciaría.
Navalny and his team were the greatest whistleblowers of the Russian regime's corruption and disinformation. Today's wars are basically hybrids. As important are the military actions as the tactics of manipulating public opinion. It is the invisible war. Borrell meets with Ukrainian activists in denouncing these practices. The European Union funds several local organizations fighting against fake news.
Russia puts in risk with demoralizing Ukrainian society, spreading fatigue among Ukrainian society, reducing our spirit and our willingness to fight. And unfortunately, we still have a lot of channels that Russia can use in Ukraine for spreading disinformation. The idea is to deprive Ukraine of Western support, because it's clear that without the support, Ukraine will not be able to win the war, deprive us of Western weapons, and to spread the fatigue and desire to support Ukraine.
Russia is doing a lot on the information warfare. We see that on the Sahel, when I see these young African people coming with billboards saying Putin has saved Donbass. To explain this story in order for these young African people that maybe don't even know where the Donbass is, saying Putin has saved the Donbass and now he will save us. Please, Putin, come and save us. And this is a powerful machine trying to make the world attention to turn away from Ukraine.
In Brussels, a team led by German Lutz Gullner fights disinformation strategies that threaten Europe's fragile internal balances.
Mein Dienst ist nicht besonders groß, aber trotzdem 40 Personen. Und das, was wir machen, ist wirklich das Aufspüren, das Analysieren von Falschinformationen und insbesondere Informationsmanipulation. Es ist nicht nur das Verbreiten von bestimmten Inhalten, sondern es geht sehr viel weiter. Es ist das Benutzen von bestimmten Techniken, um eine große Reichweite zum Beispiel zu erzielen. Doppelgänger ist ein Beispiel, wie solche Kampagnen funktionieren. In dem Falle hat man Webseiten von Medien mit sehr guter Reputation, zum Beispiel Der Spiegel, The Guardian, Le Monde, hat man kopiert, aber ganz leicht die Adressen verändert. Das heißt, die Menschen, die auf diese entsprechenden Webseiten gegangen sind, dachten, sie lesen das Medium ihrer Referenz, sind aber einem anderen Medium begegnet, wo die Inhalte ausgetauscht wurden. Und damit wird man als jemand, der das gar nicht erkennen kann, wird man sogar ein bisschen zum Komplizen, weil man ja anfängt, auch diese Inhalte zu teilen, und zwar unwissentlich. Also man wird Teil dieses Systems. Wir sehen insbesondere russische Akteure ganz besonders stark im Vordergrund. Sie sind sehr deutlich, sind natürlich seit dem Angriffskrieg von Russland auf die Ukraine noch deutlicher. Aber es gibt auch andere Akteure, wie beispielsweise chinesische Akteure, die wir identifizieren. Und wir dürfen auch nicht vergessen, es sind auch nichtstaatliche Akteure wie terroristische Organisationen, Daesh zum Beispiel, die auch die gleichen Techniken hier benutzen.
For the European Union, it is time to discuss what will be perhaps the biggest enlargement in its history with 9 other countries. The idea is to end Europe's grey zones with Ukraine, a war-torn country of 40 million people at the center of all discussions.
Hoy el Consejo de Asuntos Exteriores de la Unión se reúne para discutir el apoyo que vamos a dar a Ucrania, económico, militar y diplomático.
Що вважаємо, що сприяння Україні – це допомога всьому світу. Ми вважаємо, що якщо Україна впаде, то Росія розпочне велику війну і не тільки на території України. Дякую вам за те, що сьогодні ви тут, а це знак вашої спільної підтримки України. Слава Україні!
I propose a new bilateral multi-annual envelope under the European Peace Facility of up to 5 billion for the next year in singular, more will come. We'll continue training Ukrainian soldiers. The target today is to train 40,000 in the coming months, and this includes specialized training for fighter jets pilots. And we will continue working in increasing resilience, cyber defense, and defense against hybrid threats such as disinformation and developing a common strategic communications. It's very important to increase our support on demining. This is a key condition for Ukraine's economic recovery and reconstruction.
So we began this war as a friend who deserved help, but who was not part of the family. And now it's a completely different tone and content of the discussion, because they are discussing helping a member of the family, helping out of the biggest threat that this member of the family is facing.
When the European Union Council decided to consider Ukraine as a candidate, you know that at the beginning it was quite a reluctancy. Ukraine is such a big country, at war, are they prepared or not? But once we passed the Rubicon, once we decided to get you in, then everybody is pushing for that. And yes, certainly you have to do the classical reform that any democracy has to do in order to fulfill European standards. But you will do it because from your side also it's clear that the European path.
For us and for many other people in Europe, Ukraine is just coming back from the Russian captivity. Astonishingly, what President Putin did, presenting himself as the advocate of this traditional civilization that is different from the European one, he got the contrary effect. He gave us space to cut off all the connections with Russia, and return to where we belong, which is Europe.
To avoid wars, you have to get rid of the gray zones, and it's very clear why there's a war in Ukraine right now is because they are not part of the European Union and they are not part of NATO. So they are in this gray zone, and the aggressor thinks that they are too weak and you know, they can enlarge their empire. Weakness provokes aggressors, not strength.
La guerra contra Ucrania ha sido el gran tema para Europa. Sí, somos un soft power en el sentido de que nuestras armas son el Estado de Derecho y el comercio. Pero ahora el mundo se ha vuelto un poco más complicado. Y yo creo que con eso solo no navegaremos, o navegaremos poco, y corremos el riesgo de naufragar. And today we are writing a new page in the European Union defense. Today we are holding the first ever joint European Union military exercise that has happened.
In Kyiv, joint maneuvers take place for the first time outside NATO. The world is in the midst of an arms race, and the Atlantic Alliance is demanding that European countries significantly increase their defense spending. The plan is to have a rapid reaction force, perhaps the embryo of a future European army?
Cada Estado va a seguir teniendo su ejército, pero ¿podemos hacer que los ejércitos europeos operen conjuntamente? Deberíamos, porque eso multiplicaría nuestra fuerza.
European Union is an economical or geopolitical alliance, but it's clear that all the European countries have to strengthen their defense. That also strengthens NATO as a whole.
la guerra de Ucrania nos ha enfrentado a una realidad muy terrible, que hay guerras convencionales, que hay guerras del siglo pasado y que somos muy vulnerables. Llegar al 2% del PIB en defensa es muy importante. Invertir en defensa es invertir en paz, en libertad, en seguridad y en valores democráticos. No hay nada más importante que eso.
Muchos de los que están en contra del gasto militar, a la hora de la verdad, se quejan de que no hayamos sido capaces de intervenir en Siria. Bueno, pero ¿cómo íbamos a intervenir en Siria? ¿Con un tirachinas? O sea, si usted quiere que se intervenga será porque tiene capacidades, ¿no? Si no las tiene, pues tiene que estar dependiente de otro que sí las tiene.
Aujourd'hui, on ose parler de défense européenne. La guerre a été un facteur supplémentaire, bien sûr, mais je voudrais insister sur le fait que ça a vraiment démarré avant et que les Européens ont pris conscience progressivement qu'il fallait qu'ils bâtissent tous les instruments de leur autonomie, de leur capacité à agir comme ils le voulaient, là où ils le voulaient, en tant que puissance économique, politique, industrielle, mais ayant aussi les moyens de se défendre et de défendre ses intérêts.
Some armies of the EU27 already participate in various military missions around the world, such as Atalanta to fight piracy in the Gulf of Aden, Irini against immigration mafias in the Mediterranean, or the recent Aspites to protect European ships against Houthi attacks in the Red Sea.
Los países que son más próximos a la frontera rusa tienen unas preocupaciones determinadas. Los países del sur, como puede ser España o como puede ser Portugal o Italia, tenemos otras preocupaciones geográficas distintas, por ejemplo, la situación en el Sahel. Y tenemos que ser capaces de armonizar eso. No es fácil porque evidentemente cada país tiende siempre a mirar sus peculiaridades.
Ha habido otros muchos momentos, golpes de Estado en el Sahel, una guerra civil en Etiopía, la permanente inestabilidad en el Cuerno de África.
Africa is one of the most complex scenarios for a Europe weighed down by its colonial past and struggling not to lose its strategic influence on Russia and China. The European Union funds refugee camps and militarily reinforces democratic governments such as Ghana's, threatened by a wave of coups d'etats in the region. Borrell comes to deliver military equipment.
The 105 militarized vehicles and other critical defense equipment donated the Ghana Armed Forces and the other security agencies amounts to some 20 million euros, and they are being financed by the European Peace Facility.
The High Representative moves to China. The Asian giant is the silent elephant in the geopolitical room, a key player in the new multipolar order. The trade relationship is highly unbalanced, a high-risk situation for Europeans.
1 on 5 jobs in the European Union depends on exports. We are the most open economy in the world, and we trade with China 2.3 billion euros every day. Yes, we were too much dependent, that over-dependencies can become vulnerabilities. And we have to look for the right balance between remaining open and reducing risk. China tampoco entiende muy bien la realidad intrínseca, por ejemplo, de la guerra de Rusia contra Ucrania. Tienen influencia sobre Rusia, mucha influencia sobre Rusia. Han dicho que tienen una amistad sin límites, aunque a la hora de la verdad todas las amistades tienen límites. Y de esta contienda Rusia saldrá debilitada y China seguramente reforzada en su papel geopolítico.
Who made the crazy idea of considering Putin a reliable supplier? Someone did. And put a lot of money building pipelines, believing that I buy your gas, you buy my products, and we are good friends, and everybody's happy. Well, everybody's happy until a virus comes or a war starts. Then not everyone is happy. But from the point of view of defending these socioeconomic rights, we are much advanced than you. Sorry, we are more communist than you. They say. Because we take from the pockets of the people 40% or 50% of their wealth, and we redistribute it among the society. And we have a system of pensions and public health and public education, which is, we may say, more collectivist than yours. And we consider that the basic things of the human life are not to the market to provide. It's to the political organization of the society.
And just in these days, a new conflict enters the scene, another major challenge for European diplomacy.
The 7th of October was a tragic day for the State of Israel. It was the worst day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. More than 3,000 terrorists entered into Israel. Murdered more than 1,400 people, among them children, babies, entire families.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
The drums of war begin to beat in the Middle East. The Foreign Service activates the Crisis Committee, coordinated by the Spanish diplomat Francisco Fontán.
Cuando entramos en una crisis, tenemos un focus especial de información y ahí nos convertimos un poquito en un instrumento de fusión de información de la casa que tiene la terminal diplomática, una terminal de defensa y una terminal de inteligencia. Entonces, utilizar esas tres terminales de una manera más o menos táctica y luego estamos constantemente preparando la posibilidad de una evacuación, tanto de ciudadanos europeos como de nuestros diplomáticos sobre el terreno. That pretty much everything is ready if we ever need to evacuate through the sea. But when that happens, the movement from the embassies to the port will be quite sensitive and complicated. So we need to continue thinking and working on that and developing all the maps.
All the plans are there, air resources are fixed, CPOs, armored vehicles.
Yeah.
Borrell follows the attacks from China.
How many times Israel have committed war crimes? Do you start by asking them to condemn themselves?
Ya nadie habla de Ucrania. Parece como si en nuestro universo mediático solamente seamos capaces de digerir una crisis a la vez. Y ahora ven que nosotros, pues de repente, tenemos la atención de Oriente Medio, porque en todos los países europeos hay comunidades palestinas y comunidades judías. En todo caso, para nosotros, el mundo occidental, pues plantea un problema de respeto a los valores que defendemos.
The threat of terrorist attack is clear here in Europe, but all over the world as well. So the general level of alert and contact with colleagues on the ground has to be kept. We cannot just concentrate on what's going on in the Middle East, but the impact of the Middle East on the rest of the world. Tenemos colegas todo el día y toda la noche y mientras nosotros estamos durmiendo, ellos están monitorizando todo lo que sale en fuentes abiertas para ver un poco qué es lo que está ocurriendo. Entonces ellos tienen una responsabilidad de crear un flujo de información sobre lo que pasa en todo el mundo en todo momento. Es una información que compartimos con todos los Estados miembros y con otros partners como la Unión Africana o Naciones Unidas y con un foco especial cuando hay una crisis en particular.
Israel responds with a large-scale attack on northern Gaza. The escalation threatens to destabilize the entire Arab world. Borrell makes contact with political leaders.
Okay, please, the High Representative is now waiting for him, please. Thank you.
¿Y luego tengo que hablar con quién más?
Arabia Saudí, a las 10:30.
How are you, Excellency? Now the situation in Gaza becomes more and more horrible.
I think we haven't done enough.
We haven't, certainly not. We have failed miserably on making the two-state solution something more than just a slogan to be repeated in all international meetings. We are in favor of the two-state solution. Yes, we are. And then what? And then what? But now, maybe it's the moment for the international community to react. And this has to be done with a full engagement of the Arab world, and it can mobilize the European side.
Back from China, Borrell meets online with the leaders of the EU 27 to try to agree on a common message. The danger is a possible connection between the war fronts in Ukraine and the Middle East.
The EU and international community should not lose
focus on the main issues.
Israel simply undermined the two-state solution with its illegal unilateral measures. Now, the question that should be asked is, if it is not two-state solution, then what? And then it's going to be a one-state reality. And a one-state reality will not be a solution. It will be an ugly reality characterized by apartheid, which will be a recipe for further conflict.
In Gaza, the dead are beginning to number in the thousands. The desperation of the civilian population is growing, coupled with an increasing scarcity of resources. The seams of the European Union are being pulled apart by this new crisis. At the UN, Germans, Austrians, Czechs and Italians vote differently from the other European members. The scars of history are taking their toll.
Les Européens, ça n'est pas un secret, n'ont pas une vue unanime sur ce qui se passe dans la région, mais je crois qu'on a des objectifs qui sont unanimes.
As you know, the member states in the United Nations, they voted in different approaches. Yes, no, and abstention. I'm supposed to represent a common position, but there is not a common position.
Lo que necesitamos es unidad en torno a algo en lo que estamos de acuerdo, que es que Hamas es una organización terrorista que debe ser combatida, que Israel tiene el derecho a la defensa y que ese derecho a la defensa tiene que realizarse en el marco del derecho internacional humanitario. Pero para mí hay una condición fundamental. Si visito Israel, debo poder también visitar Ramallah.
Bueno, es un conflicto que dura ya más de 50 años y que no solamente es divisivo entre los gobiernos, sino hasta incluso entre las propias sociedades. Y no solamente en Europa, sino también en el mundo. En todo caso, creo que la posición de Josep Borrell es coherente con la misma posición que tenemos en Ucrania.
Les recomiendo que lean el Diccionario Práctico del Derecho Humanitario, donde se dice claramente que privar del suministro básico de agua a una comunidad humana bajo asedio es contrario al derecho internacional. En Ucrania y en Gaza. Y si no somos capaces de decirlo en los dos sitios, carecemos de la autoridad moral necesaria para que nuestra voz se oiga. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, High Representative Borrell.
El mejor amigo de Israel no es el que le da carta blanca, es aquel que le advierte de las consecuencias de sembrar más odio y repetir ese ciclo de violencia. Europa en esto está dividida, porque hay distintos países con distintas sensibilidades explicables por su historia. Todo el mundo está en contra del Holocausto y en contra del antisemitismo, pero otros se sienten más responsables. Hay claramente un complejo de culpabilidad expresado en algunos países que no quieren que se ponga ningún límite a Israel, que su derecho a la defensa se pueda ejercer sin límites.
Alors, je pense que la crise actuelle est sans doute une des crises les plus compliquées qui soit, hein, pour nous tous, pour toutes les institutions, pour tous les États membres. Ça fait référence à beaucoup de facteurs qui ne sont pas encore mis en commun nécessairement. Mais ça, c'est l'histoire de l'Union européenne. On voit bien qu'à chaque crise, au début, on dit toujours « Ah, l'Union européenne est désunie, il n'y a plus d'Union européenne ». Ça se construit.
Y es verdad que en muchas ocasiones se ha hablado de las crisis de la Unión Europea, de las dificultades que tiene la Unión Europea, de la lentitud en la toma de decisiones de la Unión Europea, pero es que los procesos democráticos, en este caso a 27 Estados miembros, llevan su tiempo, pero al final acaba sucediendo.
The High Representative embarks on his most delicate journey, a journey in which every gesture and every word count in preserving the balance. The risk of the conflict spreading throughout the Arab world is a serious threat to Europe.
Yo tengo de alguna manera que superar una cierta acusación de ser pro-palestino. Yo no soy ni pro-palestino ni pro-israelí. Yo tengo que buscar la paz entre esos dos pueblos que se disputan la misma tierra, que se respeten mutuamente y vivan en libertad y dignidad cada uno de ellos sin tener que pasar por esta sucesión de violencia. Y si no lo conseguimos, pues la espiral del odio va a seguir creciendo y iremos de funeral en funeral y de muertos en muertos sin saber cuándo esto se puede parar.
The High Representative, accompanied by Israeli Minister for Foreign Affairs, Eli Cohen, visits one of the kibbutzim under attack.
There is only one who is responsible for this atrocity, and it's Hamas. They are not human. They are monsters. And we all should be united to free Gaza from Hamas. For the security of the state of Israel, for the people in Gaza, and for the entire world. Otherwise, Europe will be the next. Thank you very much.
Minister, allow me to say something that comes not from this piece of paper, but from the bottom of my heart. I understand your fears and pain. I understand the fears and pain of the people that has been attacked, slaughtered, kidnapped. I understand your rage. But let me ask you not to be consumed by rage. That's what the best friend of Israel can tell you. Because what makes the difference between a civilized society and a terrorist group is the respect for human life. We will not be able to bring life to death, but we can give freedom to the hostages.
On the same day, a meeting takes place with the families of the hostages kidnapped by Hamas.
Imagine one people you love, only one. It can be your son, your daughter, your grandmother, your wife, your husband, only one. But now imagine this, shooting, screaming in different language, RPG to your kids, to your love that you think about now. Imagine it. Please.
It's a screenshot from a propaganda video that Hamas posted. We saw my brother frightened, humiliated, handcuffed. It's kind of crazy that we're thankful to see him like that in a video, alive. And that's how we want to get him back.
We don't have time to mourn over the dead because we just want them home. It's unbearable, so I really beg that, we just need a deal and we know there can be one.
I never felt more powerless than at that moment. Like to have the capacity to go for you and will explore all possibilities of exchanging, pressuring, asking.
I want to ask you something. I think the Qatars are the main country that influence on the Hamas. They are the money budget, they are the humanitarian budget, and if Qatar will say to Sinwar, this murder guy, stop it now, take them all out, they can do it. Your pressure is not simple on Qatar, but Qatar needs the reputation for the whole Arab world, and they need the reputation in Europe. And Europe, it's you.
Siento cuando entro en la escuela devastada y piensas que allí los niños que había fueron asesinados, pero claro, es que a 5 kilómetros están bombardeando Gaza y también están muriendo todos los días niños bajo las bombas. Por eso un horror no justifica otro horror.
I am coming from a part of the world, the European Union, Europe, that for years we have been fighting against each other, devastating, killing, almost committing suicide. And at the end we make a reconciliation, and today you can travel from Gibraltar to the Arctic without crossing any border. The border, Mr. President, are the scars that the history has been carving on the skin of the earth. And we have to overcome them. And we have to make peace, not only between Israel and the Arab countries, but between Israel and Palestine.
Colleagues, good morning. We're extremely happy to have the High Representative with us this morning. He really wanted to come and pay a quick visit to the EU delegation.
The European Union currently has 145 delegations around the world that carry out diplomatic activities and work with each country's association, acting de facto as European embassies. In the Jerusalem delegation, the tension of the conflict is palpable.
We have a lot of Jerusalemites here among the colleagues would want to say tension, you could feel it. If you walk in the old city, the tension is very strong. If you're a Palestinian, you get stopped by the IDF police here, especially at night. There is a tension that is out there.
The whole support of the Palestinians has been reduced to humanitarian needs instead of focusing on what we need is upholding the international law, nothing more. We want to talk to you more. This is very short time. Here we can host you in our houses and anywhere. But he is wanting
But
to
he has a program. He has to go to Ramallah. Please, Shirin.
As promised in Parliament, Borrell begins the first trip by a European leader to Palestinian territory since the start of the war. The most complicated step is the meeting with the main NGOs in the West Bank. The tension caused by the Palestinian population's clashes with the settlers and the Israeli army, and above all by the increasing bombardment of Gaza, is extremely high.
Every 4 minutes now, a Palestinian is killed. And every 10 minutes, a child is killed. Everybody is talking about the time after. We have to talk about what's happening now. We have the law of jungle and not international law. And that has to stop. Another thing which worries us so much is the level of double standard. Why in the case of Ukraine, all this support that goes to Ukraine because it is fighting occupation, and in our case, the support is going to the occupier, not to the occupied.
I understand your frustration. And I understand the criticism about it. You know, when I have to draft a resolution at 27 and I need unanimity, I have to compose.
We have been calling for two states for more than 3 decades. Endless negotiations, procrastinations, coercive diplomacy. You don't want to recognize the Palestinian state. I hear you, I don't agree with you. But if you want to be practical, please address Israel to end the Israeli military occupation, but not by rhetoric, because I love your rhetoric, seriously, I've been following. Let us ask Israel to draw its borders, but we should not tolerate seeing Netanyahu at the UN holding the map from the river to the sea and then remain silent.
They have to stop the atrocity. The war crime of collective punishment, the war crime of ethnic cleansing, and the war crime of genocide.
Yes, but you know, we make me a very frustrating schedule because you put half an hour meeting, one after the other, and I have never time to discuss.
Mr. Borrell, this issue of the right of self-determination for the Palestinian people will be maintained. That is the key point.
But now we have to try to look at concrete things that we can do in order to get out of this spiral of violence.
People in the occupied Palestinian territory have, in the past 30 years, seen deals made and broken, promises made and not kept, and have seen the occupation consolidating with more settlements, more confiscation of land, more demolitions of homes, and more pronounced Israeli policy that deny the Palestinian people's right to their inalienable right to self-determination and statehood.
In the absence of military power, the EU exerts its diplomatic influence through its economic power. It is the main financier of the Palestinian National Authority, as it should be in the reconstruction of Gaza when the war is over. The High Representative's delegation now faces the final leg of the trip, Doha. The Qataris are key players in many of the recent agreements between Muslim-majority countries and the West. The possibility of securing a truce in Gaza will mark the success of their mission to the Middle East.
My dear Prime Minister, I'm sure you do everything you could in order to release these hostages. From our side, European Union, we are doing exactly the same thing, putting pressure in both parts in order
to make this deal possible.
That we are close enough to reach to a deal that can bring the people safely back to their homes, whether they are the hostages on Hamas side or whatever the exchange that will happen will take place from the Israeli side. Most importantly is to see humanitarian aid and humanitarian assistance flowing into Gaza. We see the people are suffering from starvation, people are lacking of power, of clean water, of sanitation, the hospitals lacking out of fuel. So these are the most important things which shouldn't be relevant to the deal itself, but if the deal is going to facilitate it, we hope that happens as soon as possible.
Le Qatar et l'Union européenne voient une pause humanitaire très proche à Gaza.
Hamas and Israel agree to exchange 50 hostages in exchange for 150 Palestinian prisoners.
Borrell and his team returned to Brussels to explain the agreement to the EU 27. The European Union is a structure that is always based on a fragile balance, a Europe that seems to function best in the face of threats, such as Brexit, the pandemic, or Ukraine. A Europe that perhaps still finds it too difficult to explain its project to its citizens.
Europa solo reacciona cuando hay una crisis. Entonces todo depende de la capacidad de reacción frente a la crisis. Pero anticiparse a una crisis y hacer pensando que algo pueda ocurrir, esa actitud proactiva, somos mucho más reactivos. Por lo tanto, seremos lo que el mundo nos obligue a ser.
U.S. Congress unblocked $61 billion in aid for Ukraine.
Israel ha rebut l'atac de 170 drones.
Les victimes de la frappe à Damas.
Geopolitical crises are advancing at a frenetic pace. The question is whether a future union of 600 million people, with its enormous organizational complexity, a Europe that still hinges on nation-states, which find it hard to cede sovereignty, will have the tools to cope with the new multipolar and globalized world.
No sé si la historia se acelerará o echará marcha atrás. Lo que sí sé es que los padres fundadores seguro que no imaginaron que la Europa que ellos concibieron fuese a ir tan lejos como ha ido. Everybody goes to Tel Aviv, begging, please, don't do that. Protect civilians, don't kill so many. How many is too many? Which is the standard? But Netanyahu doesn't listen to anyone. They're going to evacuate. Where? To the moon? Well, if you believe that too many people are being killed, maybe you should provide less arms in order to prevent so many people being killed. It's not logical?